On a cold December morning in 2002, in the quiet town of Springville, Utah, nestled against the Wasatch Mountains where snow-capped peaks touch winter skis, a young mother named Lori K. Soares Hacking disappeared without a trace. She was 27 years old, 5 weeks pregnant, and according to her husband, she had gone for an early morning jog at Memory Grove Park in Salt Lake City and simply never returned. Her running shoes were missing. Her car sat in the driveway. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled as if someone had risen quickly, urgently. But Lori was gone. And in the days that followed, as search dogs combed through canyons and volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through scrubland calling her name, a question began to form in the minds of those who looked closely at the man who reported her missing, the man who wept on camera and begged for her return, the man who was her husband. The question was simple, terrible, and would take years to answer with certainty. What really happened to Lori Hacking that morning when the sun had not yet risen over the mountains? Springville sits in Utah County, a place where the Mormon faith shapes daily life and community bonds run deep through generations. The streets are wide and clean. Homes have tidy lawns. Children ride bicycles in cul-de-sacs under the watchful eyes of neighbors who know each other's names, birthdays, and histories. The Wasatch Range rises to the east like a protective wall, its presence both comforting and imposing, a reminder of the landscape's power and indifference. Lori K. Soares grew up in this world of order and expectation. She had dark hair, warm eyes, and a smile that people remembered. She worked as a sales associate at Wells Fargo, handling customer accounts with the patience and attention to detail that her supervisor noted in performance reviews. She was organized, reliable, the kind of person who kept a day planner and returned phone calls promptly. In 1999, she married Mark Douglas Hacking, a man she had known from their church community, a man who seemed destined for success in medicine, who spoke of becoming a physician with the confidence of someone whose path was already laid out. They lived in a small apartment in Salt Lake City, modest but sufficient for a young couple building a life together. Mark told friends and family he was finishing his undergraduate degree at the University of Utah, preparing to attend medical school in North Carolina. They had plans. They were packing boxes. Lori had given notice at her job. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and new beginnings. July 19, 2002, was a Monday. The air was already warm by dawn, the kind of dry heat that characterizes Utah summers. Lori had worked her shift at the bank the previous week, said goodbye to coworkers who threw her a small farewell party with cake and good wishes. She and Mark were supposed to leave for North Carolina soon, very soon, to start their new life. That Sunday evening they had attended church services. Neighbors saw them return home. Lights went on in their apartment. Lights went off. The night settled over the city like any other night. Mark Hacking called emergency services at 10:49 on Monday morning. His voice on the recording was strained, worried. He said his wife had gone jogging at Memory Grove Park around 6 that morning and had not come home. He said he had gone to look for her himself, driving the route she usually took, searching the parking areas and trails. He said her car was still at their apartment complex. He said he was frightened something terrible had happened. The dispatcher asked standard questions. Mark provided answers. The call lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Officers arrived at Memory Grove Park within 20 minutes. The park sits in a canyon northeast of downtown Salt Lake City, a place of walking paths and running trails that follow a creek bed through cottonwood trees and scrub oak. It is popular with joggers, especially in early morning when the air is cool and the city has not yet awakened fully. Officers walked the main trail. They checked the parking lot. They looked for any sign of disturbance, any indication that something unusual had occurred. They found nothing. No shoe, no water bottle, no signs of struggle. The creek ran clear and quiet, Birds called from the branches. The morning proceeded as mornings do. Clear's throat. But there were details, small things that did not align properly when examined closely. Mark said Lori left around 6 in the morning. He said he was sleeping when she left, that he woke later and realized she had not returned. But when investigators spoke to him that first day, noting his demeanor and responses, something felt slightly wrong, like a picture frame hung 1 degree off level. His eyes were red, yes, but dry. He provided specific details about her running clothes, her shoes, her habits. He said she always ran the same route. He said she was predictable in her routines. Yet when they asked why he had not called earlier if she left at 6 and it was now nearly 11, he said he thought maybe she had stopped at a store, maybe run errands, maybe lost track of time. Those who knew Lori said she was never late without calling. She was the type who sent text messages if running 10 minutes behind schedule. She would not vanish for 5 hours without contact, especially not when they were preparing to move across the country. The search began in earnest that afternoon. Salt Lake City Police Department organized teams of officers to comb Memory Grove and the surrounding canyons. Volunteers arrived, members of their church congregation, friends from the bank where Lori worked, strangers who had seen the news reports and felt compelled to help. They formed lines and walked through brush and ravines, calling her name. Search and rescue teams brought dogs trained to detect human scent. Helicopters flew overhead, observers scanning the rocky terrain for any flash of color, any indication of a body or clothing. Mark Hacking stood with Lori's family as the search continued. Her parents had driven from their home in Orem as soon as they heard. Her mother wept openly. Her father's face was set like stone. Mark placed his arm around his mother-in-law's shoulders. He spoke to reporters who had gathered, cameras and microphones capturing his plea for Lori's safe return. He said she was pregnant, that they were expecting their first child, that she had everything to live for. He said he loved her. He said he just wanted her home. The media descended quickly. Missing pregnant woman makes for compelling news coverage. Local stations ran segments every hour. National outlets picked up the story. Lori's photograph appeared on screen after screen, her smile frozen in time, while reporters stood outside the apartment complex describing the mystery, the concern, the growing fear that something sinister had occurred. By evening, the search had expanded to include the Jordan River and nearby areas where someone might dispose of evidence or hide a body. Divers prepared to search retention ponds. The temperature dropped as the sun set behind the mountains. Volunteers continued searching by flashlight, unwilling to stop while any hope remained. Mark returned to the apartment with Lori's family. Someone had to stay by the phone in case there was a ransom demand or Lori herself called. Someone had to be there if she walked through the door confused, injured but alive. She did not walk through the door. Part 2. The investigation. The search operation grew larger on Tuesday. More than 1,000 volunteers showed up at staging areas, ready to be deployed across the search grid. Police coordinated with county sheriff's departments, with state agencies, with federal resources. They brought cadaver dogs. They brought sonar equipment for the water searches. They established a command post and a tip line. The community responded with the kind of mobilization that happens when one of their own is missing, when the danger feels close and real. But even as the public search continued, investigators were beginning to focus their attention elsewhere. They reviewed Mark Hacking's timeline again. They asked him to walk them through the morning step by step. He said he woke up around 8:30. He said he realized Lori had not returned from her run. He said he got dressed and drove to Memory Grove to look for her. He said he searched the trails for over an hour before calling police. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about discrepancies. If Lori left at 6 for a run that typically took 45 minutes, and Mark woke at 8:30. Why did he not become concerned until after 9:30? Why did it take him over an hour to decide to call for help? And when they checked with the university, when they made routine inquiries about Mark's enrollment status, they discovered something that shattered the foundation of his story. Mark Hacking was not enrolled at the University of Utah. He had never completed his undergraduate degree. The acceptance to medical school in North Carolina did not exist. The entire narrative of their impending move, the reason Lori had quit her job, the future they had discussed with family and friends, was built on fabrication. Mark had been lying for months, perhaps years, about his education and his prospects. When confronted with this information on Wednesday, 2 days after Lori's disappearance, Mark's composure began to crack. He was at his father's house when investigators arrived to ask more questions. He became agitated. He paced. He said he needed to go to the hospital, that he was having a breakdown. His family drove him to the psychiatric unit at University of Utah Hospital, where he was admitted under observation. The man who had stood before cameras begging for his wife's return was now sedated and under medical supervision, while investigators tried to determine if he was a grieving husband or something much darker. Those who knew him said Mark had always been charismatic, confident, the type who could tell a story and make you believe it completely. He spoke about medical school with such detail, such authority, that no one thought to question whether it was true. He showed people acceptance letters that turned out to be forgeries. He discussed courses and professors that did not exist. The lies were elaborate, sustained over time, maintained with the kind of discipline that suggested practice and calculation. Physical evidence remained elusive. Investigators searched the apartment Mark and Lori shared. They found boxes packed for the move that would never happen. They found her purse, her wallet, her identification. They found her wedding ring on the bedside table, which struck some as odd since Lori wore her ring constantly according to friends. They collected bedding, looking for blood evidence, for signs of violence. The bed frame showed no unusual marks. The mattress showed no obvious staining. But they took everything anyway, sent it to the state crime lab for analysis that would take weeks to complete. The search of Memory Grove continued for days. Volunteers walked the same trails again and again, hopping to find something investigators had missed. The park became a focal point of media attention, reporters doing stand-ups with the canyon walls in the background, describing the ongoing effort to find Lori Hacking. But privately, investigators no longer believed she had ever been to Memory Grove that morning. They believed the scene had been staged, the story constructed to buy time and create distance from whatever had actually occurred. On Friday, July 26th, 1 week after Lori disappeared, investigators executed a search warrant at a different location. They went to the Salt Lake Valley Solid Waste Management Facility, the main landfill serving the Salt Lake City area. They brought cadaver dogs. They brought excavation equipment. They brought a grim determination born from the growing certainty that Lori Hacking was not missing but deceased, and that her body had been disposed of in the most callous manner imaginable. The landfill sprawled across acres of desert landscape, a vast expanse of garbage and debris delivered by hundreds of trucks each day. Finding a body in such a place would be like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. But investigators had tracked the trash collection routes, had identified which dumpsters served the area near Mark and Lori's apartment, had calculated where material collected on Monday morning would likely have been deposited. They sectioned off areas. They began the methodical, nauseating work of searching through tons of refuse. Media coverage intensified. The image of investigators in protective gear sifting through garbage while searching for a pregnant woman's remains created a visceral reaction in those following the case. The community held vigils. Churches organized prayer services. Lori's photograph appeared on flyers and billboards with the word "missing" underneath, though fewer and fewer people believed she would be found alive. Mark remained hospitalized. His attorney, appointed after he was designated a person of interest in his wife's disappearance, restricted access to him. He gave no further statements. He did not participate in additional searches. While volunteers combed canyons and investigators dug through landfills, Mark Hacking lay in a hospital bed, silent and unavailable. The weeks passed. August arrived with its relentless heat. The search at the landfill continued in shifts, investigators rotating through the grueling work. They found nothing. No body. No definitive evidence. The case began to cool not because investigators lost interest but because they had exhausted the obvious avenues of inquiry. Without a body, without a confession, without witnesses to the actual crime, building a case that could stand in court became increasingly difficult. But they did not stop. They interviewed everyone in Mark and Lori's social circle. They spoke to coworkers, family members, neighbors. They built a timeline of Mark's movements on July 19th. They discovered he had purchased a new mattress on Monday afternoon, hours after reporting Lori missing. The old mattress had been thrown away. They found the receipt. They tracked the dumpster. The mattress had been compacted and mixed with thousands of pounds of other waste now buried in the landfill. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that terrible dissonance between what you want to believe and what the evidence suggests, the experience of Lori's family during this period was almost unbearable. They defended Mark initially, insisted he could not have harmed their daughter. But as the lies accumulated, as the timeline became clearer, their certainty wavered. Her mother stopped sleeping. Her father gave interviews asking anyone with information to come forward. The silence from Mark's hospital room felt like an answer in itself. By late August, the investigation had stalled. The landfill search was suspended after weeks of fruitless digging. No body had been recovered. No murder weapon had been found. Mark remained hospitalized, then was transferred to the county jail on an unrelated charge involving his false claims about medical school. But authorities could not yet charge him with Lori's disappearance because they could not prove definitively that she was deceased. Part 3. The Silence. 3 months after Lori vanished, the media attention began to fade. Other stories took precedence. The daily updates stopped. Her case became one more unsolved mystery, one more family living in the terrible limbo of not knowing. Mark's family struggled with the implications of what investigators believed had happened. His parents maintained his innocence publicly, said their son was incapable of violence. His siblings were divided. Some believed the evidence, the timeline, the lies. Others clung to doubt, to the possibility that some other explanation existed. Family gatherings became tense, conversations careful, the unspoken accusation hanging over every interaction. Lori's family moved through their grief in stages. Though without a body to bury, without a clear resolution, the process felt incomplete. Her mother kept Lori's bedroom unchanged, clothes still in the closet, photographs on the dresser. Her father threw himself into work, into anything that would fill the hours and prevent thought. They established a scholarship fund in Lori's name. They attended court hearings when Mark faced charges related to his fraudulent claims. They waited. In October 2002, investigators got the break they needed. A worker at the Salt Lake Valley Solid Waste Management Facility was operating equipment in a section of the landfill when he spotted what appeared to be human remains. He stopped immediately. He called supervisors. Police were notified. A forensic team arrived to carefully excavate and document the scene. The body was badly decomposed, wrapped in material that had protected it somewhat from the crushing machinery and environmental exposure. Investigators worked with painstaking care to preserve any evidence. They photographed everything. They collected samples. They transported the remains to the medical examiner's office, where positive identification could be made through dental records and DNA analysis. On October 2, 2002, the medical examiner confirmed what investigators had believed for months. The remains were those of Lori K. Soares Hacking. Cause of death was determined to be a gunshot wound to the head. She had been wrapped in bedding and disposed of in a dumpster near the apartment she shared with her husband. She had never gone jogging that morning. She had never left the apartment alive. The news hit the community like a physical blow. People who had hoped against hope that maybe Lori was alive somewhere, maybe she had amnesia or had run away, now faced the brutal reality. She had been lying in a landfill for months while her family searched, while volunteers combed canyons, while her husband maintained his lies from a hospital bed. Mark Hacking was formally charged with first-degree murder on October 3rd. He was already in custody on the fraud charges, but now he faced the possibility of life in prison for killing his wife. His attorney arranged for him to be transferred to the Utah State Hospital for evaluation. The question of his mental state at the time of the crime became central to the defense strategy. For those who have noticed how quickly communities move from sympathy to anger, the shift in public sentiment toward Mark was swift and complete. People who had volunteered in the searches, who had prayed for Lori's safe return, now gathered outside the jail demanding justice. The story that had begun with a missing pregnant woman now had a clearer, darker shape. It was a story of lies and desperation, of a man whose fabricated life was about to collapse and who chose violence rather than confession. Lori's family issued a statement through their attorney. They said they were grateful to have Lori back, to be able to lay her to rest properly. They said they forgave Mark, that their faith required forgiveness even in circumstances as terrible as these. They said they missed Lori every moment of every day, that the hole she left could never be filled. The months that followed were consumed by legal proceedings. Mark's defense team argued that he had experienced a psychotic break, that he had not been in control of his actions. Prosecutors countered that the evidence showed planning and calculation, the purchase of the new mattress, the disposal of the body, the false report to police. These were not the actions of someone in the grip of temporary insanity, but of someone trying to cover up a crime. In January 2003, 6 months after Lori's death, Mark's attorney approached prosecutors about a possible plea agreement. The defense knew the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses would testify about Mark's lies, about his behavior before and after Lori's disappearance. The forensic evidence linked him to the disposal of her body. A trial would likely result in conviction, and Utah allowed the death penalty in murder cases. Negotiations continued for months. Lori's family was consulted about their wishes. They said they did not want to endure a trial, did not want to sit through testimony about how Lori died, did not want to relive the trauma. They said they wanted closure, wanted this chapter to end so they could begin to heal. Part 4. The Revelation. On April 15, 2004, nearly 2 years after Lori Hacking's death, Mark Douglas Hacking appeared in 3rd District Court in Salt Lake City. He wore an orange jumpsuit. His hands were shackled. His face showed the weight of the preceding months, drawn and pale. The confident man who had once discussed his medical school plans now reduced to a defendant awaiting sentencing. Judge Denise Lindbergh presided over the hearing. The courtroom was packed with media, with Lori's family, with members of the public who had followed the case from the beginning. Mark's parents sat on one side of the gallery, Lori's parents on the other, a physical manifestation of the divide this case had created. Mark's attorney stood and addressed the court. He said his client wished to enter a guilty plea to first-degree murder. He said Mark accepted responsibility for Lori's death. He said Mark wanted to spare Lori's family the pain of a trial. The judge asked Mark directly if he understood the consequences of his plea, if he was entering it voluntarily. Mark said yes, his voice barely audible. The prosecutor then read a statement detailing the facts of the case as they understood them. On the morning of July 19, 2002, Mark Hacking had confronted the reality that his lies about medical school were about to be exposed. Lori had begun to suspect something was wrong. She had made phone calls to verify information Mark had given her. She was asking questions he could not answer without admitting the entire fabrication. That morning, while Lori was still in bed, Mark retrieved a rifle from where he had hidden it in the apartment. He shot her once in the head as she slept. She died instantly. He then wrapped her body in bedding, placed it in a dumpster behind a nearby store, and disposed of the weapon. He purchased a new mattress to replace the one stained with blood. He staged the apartment to look as though Lori had gone for a run. He called police to report her missing. The prosecutor said that every action Mark took afterward was designed to deflect suspicion and buy time. The tears on camera were performance. The search efforts were theater. The hospitalization was strategy. Through it all, Lori's body lay in a landfill, treated as garbage, while her family suffered not knowing her fate. Lori's mother was given the opportunity to address the court. She stood, gripping the podium for support. She said that Mark had taken not just Lori's life, but the life of Lori's unborn child, had robbed them of a daughter and grandchild, had destroyed their sense of safety and trust. She said she forgave him because her faith demanded it, but that forgiveness did not mean she could forget, did not mean the pain would ever fully heal. She said she hoped Mark would spend his time in prison reflecting on what he had done, understanding the magnitude of his actions. Mark's mother also spoke. She said she loved her son but could not comprehend his actions. She said she was sorry for what Lori's family had endured. She said she prayed daily for Lori's soul and for peace for those who loved her. Judge Lindbergh imposed the sentence agreed upon in the plea negotiations: 6 years to life in prison. Mark would serve a minimum of 6 years before being eligible for parole, though the likelihood of parole in a case involving the murder of a pregnant woman was minimal. He would likely spend the rest of his life incarcerated. Mark was led from the courtroom without looking at either family. The door closed behind him. Lori's family embraced outside the courthouse, tears mixing with relief that this phase was finally over. They gave a brief statement to reporters, thanking investigators for their dedication, thanking the community for their support during the darkest period of their lives. The media coverage of the sentencing was extensive. Local news devoted entire segments to recapping the case from beginning to end. National outlets ran features about the tragedy, about the lies that led to murder, about a community that had rallied to search for a woman who was already dead. Legal analysts discussed the plea agreement, debating whether life without parole would have been more appropriate given the circumstances. Public reaction was divided between those who felt the sentence was too lenient and those who understood that Lori's family needed closure more than they needed maximum punishment. Online forums filled with arguments about justice, about forgiveness, about what Mark Hacking deserved for his crimes. In the years since, Mark has remained in prison. He has given no interviews. He has made no public statements. He exists in the anonymity of the correctional system, one more inmate serving a life sentence for murder. Lori's family established a foundation in her memory, providing support to families of missing persons and funding for search and rescue operations. Her photograph remains on their website, her smile eternal, frozen at 27. They visit her grave regularly. They speak about her to keep her memory alive, to ensure she is not remembered only as a victim but as a daughter, a friend, a person with dreams and plans that were stolen from her. Closing. The case of Lori Hacking stands as a reminder of how easily lies can compound, how desperation can lead to unthinkable violence, and how a community can come together in the face of tragedy while still failing to prevent it. For those who knew Lori, who worked beside her or worshipped with her, or simply saw her smile in passing, her death remains a wound that has scarred over but never fully healed. She deserved the future Mark took from her. She deserved to raise her child, to pursue her own dreams, to grow old and see grandchildren. Instead, she got a shallow grave in a landfill and a husband who valued his lies more than her life. Justice in this case was incomplete, as it often is. Mark Hacking breathes and eats and sleeps while Lori does none of these things. But he does so behind bars, his freedom forfeit, his name forever associated with the worst kind of betrayal. And Lori's memory persists in the hearts of those who loved her, in the foundation that bears her name, in the cautionary tale her story has become. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.